Right, here we are. Back again, working on this beautiful Chapman ML2, and it's the next next day. So just to recap what we've been up to with this, now having leveled the frets, as we saw, not a lot of uneven frets, but enough to be worth leveling. We've tidied up, taken away some of the flat, well, all of the worn areas on the fretboard, excuse me, on the fingerboard down here, sorry, on the frets themselves, and that basically leaves us with a beautifully flat neck and beautifully leveled frets, and we're ready to restring it now and put the neck under load, and then we're going to start adjusting the action and working on this nut here, which has been the cause of Malcolm's problems. So to get straight into this, we're going to crack on with a set of Ernie Ball 9s, and I'm going to have my string winder ready, along with, there's my string winder, along with my cutters, and just going to start. Now this is the really important bit, as I talked about yesterday, is getting this, getting the slots cut correctly on the nut. And as I pointed out, I also have with me a set or another nut in case we go off the mark here. Now when it comes to restringing, what I tend to do is on the bottom bass strings, take about 1.5 inches extra and bend it, push it back, so I pull it right the way through, grab it about 1.5 inches further away, and then push it back to that point, and then make a crimp in the string, and then I'm going to start winding it on from there. And this gives me more than enough wrap around. Some of my favourite tuners, not on this guitar actually, but some of my favourite tuners are the Wilkinson Easy Lock system, and with those the peg has two, or the post has 2 holes in it, so makes stringing really easy because you pull the string through and bend it straight back on itself 90 degrees, and then you only need to do about a turn or so after that, a couple of turns on the peg and you're done. And because of the 90-degree angle, it locks perfectly in place, and it also seems to maintain really good tuning stability. So they're a great favourite of mine. It seems like one of those nice little innovations that Wilkinson guitars, the John Hornby Skews guitars, made in collaboration with Trev Wilkinson. Seems to me like one of the innovations that they've put in those guitars. I really like them for that and other things. Okay, so I'm just going to put these on, and the purpose of doing this obviously is to put the neck back under load, so it's back into the normal loading for playing. And I think what we expect to find, judging by how it was set up before, we expect to find that the relief that this pulls into the neck is adequate, so we probably don't need to do anything with the truss rod, but I've got the cover off just in case. It's very often the case that the only adjustment you need really is the loading of the strings themselves, which is kind of how it should be. But sometimes you'll get a guitar where somebody's played around with it to try and make it do different things, and sometimes you can have just a huge amount of relief in it, which has caused problems. But there was nothing wrong with this guitar, so we should just expect these strings, once we tighten them up, to pull back enough relief into the neck to make it play exactly as it did when Malcolm brought it in. And the main adjustments we're now going to make in this section of the job is to make adjustments, a tiny adjustment to the playing action, i.e. the height of the strings as according to the bridge, but mainly bringing the slots, or the height of the strings over the first fret, down to a more useful height than it currently is, but more importantly, a height that doesn't result in fretted notes down that end of the neck going sharp, which is what they're currently doing, as you saw earlier, and the quite clear demonstration, a bit long-winded because I like to say things several times over, but you could see from that demonstration that this is clearly a problem to anyone who can hear a note, basically. In some ways, I suppose the downside is if you're a newcomer to playing, you're probably less likely to be able to hear that out of tuneness than an older hand at the guitar, like someone like Malcolm or myself, who can tell pretty much straight away that these chords are not sounding right, which is kind of odd because we know that we've tuned the guitar correctly. So in a way, all of that problem is usually masked from the newcomer or the initiate or the novice guitarist, because they don't quite, they're not necessarily that well practiced at hearing how things sound. So people like Malcolm and myself, I'm not a good guitarist, I'm sure he's better than me, but I've been playing long enough and I've got a good enough ear to know when those notes are playing slightly sharp. Although I couldn't diagnose originally what the problem was, I knew there was something wrong, it just didn't sound right. So at the moment, this guitar, if just tuned up and given back to Malcolm as is, probably wouldn't feel any different to how we had it before. It might be a little cleaner in some nooks and crannies, but by and large it would be very similar, and the changes are only going to come in a minute when we start working on the action and the action over the first fret. It always makes me laugh when I remember the time before string winders. If you've been playing for a long time, you probably remember when that was. It's hard to imagine some simple little device like this just didn't seem to, maybe it was around, but I never had one. I remember spending years turning away until your hands were aching to get the whole thing restrung. And now people have electronic ones, or ones that go on electric battery operated ones, and adapters for your screwdrivers and stuff like that, which is like unheard of. You could possibly have such a thing. I think the manual string winder is newfangled enough for my liking. Okay, so we're nearly there. Just going to get this last string on and wound on nicely. And I always like to cut my strings right short and tidy. Nothing worse than a big coily pile of strings flying everywhere. Of course, a set of coiled up strings has a potential to do a lot less harm than the way I cut them now, which is a very short little stub, which if you're not careful will seek revenge on you by sticking into the soft part of your finger, usually somewhere down the side of your nail, as I found. Right, so we are at present just about strung. Oh, hello. Little beetles dropped in. You can go back out. Right, I'll take all these string cuttings and put them in the ever-growing bag. And now what I'm going to do is just start doing what you always have to do, is take some of the spring out of your new strings, which involves giving them some turns. so they're always going to go out of tune. Lovely tuners. I have to say these operate. I mean, they're quality, really good quality Grovers, but you can feel how nice they are. The reason I buy Wilkinsons is mainly because they're superb quality for the price. These Grovers are more expensive than I could afford to put on the guitars that I work on usually. Right, we'll give them a couple more tugs and then we'll get into the process of assessing the height over the first fret. But I might as well get the stretch out of them first. Lovely sound, I really do. I mean, no complaints at all about the quality of that tone. It's just beautiful. But we know that Malcolm has an issue with it, and that issue is about the intonation resulting from the height of the strings over the first fret. So this is what we've got to pay some attention to. And to do this, I'm going to have a look at what we've got in terms of our using a thingy feeler gauge, and I got metric and imperial, but just having a quick look. So have I got my capo in here? I do. Okay, so what it's telling me at the moment is that I've got about, let's try this, I've got about 0.5 millimetre in total gap over that first fret. Yeah, I would say bit more than 0.5 millimetre, so 0.55, something like that, 0.56, and that's a lot. Normally I probably aim for about between 0.2 and 0.25. Now there may be manufacturers may tell you other things, and the way, if you remember me telling you, the way I worked this out a long time ago was to how much room to get under here. I worked out a long while ago was to put a capo on it. It's got a thick neck, so I have to, I can just pick it up and do it. It's probably easier. Put a capo on it and a bit more. Okay. So the easy guide, if you're thinking about doing this to yours, is, and I demonstrated this, I think, to Malcolm as well, is that if you've got this intonation problem because of the height of the strings over your first fret, one way of checking it is to take your guitar, put the capo on it, tune it up if necessary with the capo on, and play it like that. And what you'll tend to find out if the problem is the height over the first fret, you'll find that this suddenly makes the whole guitar play much better, because what you're doing really is you're taking the nut out of the equation, and you're really using the first fret as a 0 fret, or as the nut, and the way that the strings go over the new first fret, i.e. the old second fret, this one here, is the one that's working really well, and all the string heights over the frets thereafter are working well as well. And it's so what you're looking for is to duplicate this only by taking the capo off. So if we look at, we said that was about 0.55 over the first fret. Let's put that under here, and you can see it sticks straight away, right? It's way more than that. So if we go back down to something like, let's go to 0.25. Well, let's go 0.3. See if we can get a 0.3 under there. All right, so we've gone from 0.55 on the actual first fret. Even 0.3 is getting stuck under there. Okay, 0.3 is getting stuck under the second one as well. So it's probably not even 0.3. We could probably put in 0.25. That's 1/4 of a millimetre. seems an incredibly small amount, but even 1/4 of a millimetre just sort of catches and drags a bit. There's really no gap there at all. However, to be conservative, I would, if anything, I would aim for 0.25 as a target height, and we'll re-examine it at that after that. And what we know is, what we can be fairly safe in assuming is, if we can get the height of the strings over this first fret as 0.25, we know that we're going to get a guitar that plays from there like this. We're just going to be recreating this setup one fret further down, and that's really where we're aiming. I mean, you can't get much better or worse than that. So you can see, obviously without too much ado, you can see that we've got much higher than that, and the only solution, there's two solutions really. One is you could take the whole nut out and shave down the underside, and that's one way of doing it. Shave down the underside of the nut and put it back in. The problem with doing that is that you have to keep dropping it in, taking it out, shaving it down a bit more. It's one way of doing it, and you've obviously, the point being is you've got to knock it out in the first place, which isn't too hard to do. It's usually only lightly super glued in, and you would tap it out with a screwdriver or something like that, a light tap this way. So, as I say, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is, of course, to take down each individual slot, and we have a bunch of tools that I can use to do that. Just have a quick look here. Okay, the ones at the bass notes are easier to do because the little files I use are thicker, and the ones at the top end are quite hard to do because they are little thin bendy pieces of wire which distort very easily. Now with a tusk nut like this, you might say, well, okay, these grooves are already nicely cut already, and actually they're slightly cut at an angle as well, I think. No, they're not actually. That's my imagination. Some people think that when the middle two here that splay out the furthest, they have to kind of bend the middle two strings, bend out to the top two pegs. There are a lot of people who think that if you're cutting your own nut, you need to cut those slots slightly slanted to accommodate those strings. Otherwise, they go kind of into the, how do I describe it? They go into the nut, and then the string bends. Oh, sorry, the string goes straight through the nut and then bends out the other side. So basically, you're getting an angle at the back of the nut like that, which it makes hard for the string to go through. These are cut straight because it's a bog standard tusk nut by the looks of it. So the question here is, do we cut from the back or do we cut from the top? The problem with the back I don't want to do is if you knock a nut off like this, you do run the risk of taking some of the finish of this guitar with it. Some guitars have a little gap. This one appears to be very tightly finished, and I don't want to chop that off and end up splintering off a bit of lacquer. We could refill it, but it would take a lot more work, and Malcolm wants to come back to this guitar tomorrow. So with that in mind, I'm going to use a combination of these little files to do this job. and I've got a few versions of them, some new ones, some old ones, but pretty much all do the same thing, and they're more or less fiddly. So I'm going to try and use a little device for the thinnest ones. Again, not always guaranteed to work because they are incredibly fiddly. I'm going to use the newest ones I've got for this job because it's Malcolm's guitar and I want to do it as well as I can. I'm also going to zoom you in so you can see a bit better what's going on. And I want also to get the light in such a way that I can, probably more important that in this case at the moment, that I see the light. Whoops, I am so sorry. Which probably isn't the way I want it to be just yet. I'm trying to set this up so I get the light mostly where I want it. Because I'm judging these heights by the shadows. Well, first of all, I'm going to judge them by using the feeler gauge and using that to set the height of the first string, or the bass string. And then from that point onwards, I'm going to use a visual reading, and it's very accurate. Your eye is incredibly accurate. A combination of visual reading and the just checking with the feeler gauge to make sure we get all of these at the same sort of height. So important for me is to get some light. It's not really good for you viewer-wise, but I need some light so I can see a good clear shadow across these strings, which I can now. So I'm going to begin with the largest diameter, which matches the bass string here, the E. I'm going to take that out and I'm going to use this little device to cut, and I'm going to do this very, very gently. Now, tusk is a nice material, the tusk nuts. It's quite a nice material which cuts quite freely and easily. And this isn't going to be quick. So what I do is I make a little cut. I'm supporting this neck here. Make a cut. And then bring it roughly up to tune again. And what I'm looking for is whether the string's lowered any in the slot there. And again, as I do this, I'm just constantly going back at this point in time with the feeler gauge, and I can see fresh air under that. So I take it off again and I'll run this again. Now, my advice being, you just do this a little bit at a time, and you've got to get into the habit of just trusting yourself to cut, have the courage to cut it, and the caution, or the, what's the word, restraint, not to overkill it. Sorry you don't get a good view at this, I need the light angle more than you need to see it really, but and so you can see that I'm prepared to do this many, many times over to get this right, and I'd much rather saw away at it for several minutes than I would rather go and take it down too far, too quick. And then I tune back up to approximate pitch. It doesn't have to be exactly right. And I'm just looking now for the string now to be starting to head downwards towards my 0.25 of a millimetre. And we're getting there very, very slowly. But I'm very happy that it's slow. I don't want anything to happen quickly here at all. Slow is good. I'm tilting backwards a little bit as I cut because I want the string to come up to an edge. I want it to kind of run upwards to the back of, towards the front of the nut. I don't want it to come straight over the nut. So I can see now that the gap between the string and the first fret is marginally smaller than the other ones by comparison to the other ones. And if we were going to measure it, we'd be able to measure that it's now reducing. And it's probably down to about 0.4, 0.35, something like that. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. And patience. If I wasn't doing a video of this, I would put the radio on and just wear away at this with restraint and a lot of patience. And as I say, safe in the knowledge that if I completely ballsed it up, I can go back to a new nut. I'd rather not have to knock this one off and start again, but I will, you know, obviously if something went wrong and I messed up, I would obviously do that. Now these nuts are supposed to be self-lubricating. Which I think I've got them on 2 or 3 of my guitars, and I like them. They're quite expensive. They're £7 or £8, or between £8 and £12 a time, depending on which ones you get. But I guess I'm got to the stage now where, to me, this nut business, the nut is the most important part, almost the most important part of this guitar. What price getting this bit right? I mean, there's no reason. I mean, you know, you want to spend 12 quid to get this bit right. Now we're getting close to the 0.25. I can still see, when I've got the feeler gauge under there, I can still see there's some room to press the bass string down, the E, bass E, the low E. So we are getting there, and it's very slow and reassuringly unhurried, because, you know, we don't want anything to happen at any large pace that takes us by surprise and ends up with us having to recut the nut. Replace it. Which we can do if we had to. There are also some fixes you can do which actually work really surprisingly well, which I've used once or twice in the past, just to try it out more than anything else, because people have said you can do it. And it's, if you overcut the slot, you can get a little bit of baking powder, put it in the slot and drop a tiny blob of super glue on top of it, and that combination turns into a very hard, solid cement. White, conveniently. Yeah, it turns into a white cement, which kind of looks okay and allows you to recut with a file like I'm doing now, so you can recut the slot in it and rescue. It's a way of rescuing that slot that you've overcut. So it's not ideal. The purists would hate you for it, but I have to say, you know, if you've screwed up and cut too far and you don't have any replacement nuts kicking about, then you need to use it. You know, you've got somebody who wants their guitar back in half an hour, you've pretty much no choice but to make a repair. So again, I'm looking very carefully now, and I can no longer see daylight underneath this string. Tiny bit of movement still showing me that I think we're probably at about 0.3. It's not cutting very well. It's working away at it incredibly slowly. It's probably a good thing. Far better to take time. Right, now I'm just going to stop for a minute, because I say that we're nearly on 0.25. And I would be able to put my hand on my heart now and tell you that this guitar would now have far less intonation error at the top part of on this string anyway. But I'm just gonna take a quick look at this, because at the moment now we have an option. I'm just looking for another screwdriver. I can't remember where it lives, just to stab the moth. It's like bats in a belfry or something around here. I was looking for a simple screwdriver. Here it is. So we have an option to make a tiny adjustment on the action here, and I'm wondering what we're going to do. these are quite stiff actually, the way it's set up. This bridge sits incredibly tightly on these pegs. So I've made a minuscule adjustment on this end, and I'm going to make a minuscule adjustment on this end as well. Again, very tightly fitted. So I'm just taking it down an absolute fraction. And what I don't want, remember, is to have a guitar that Malcolm feels is completely different. Yeah, we don't want to end up something that's completely different to what he had before, because if we do, then it's a bit of a shock to the system. So I'm not going to take it any further down than that, because if I get my measuring thingy out, there it is, and just have a quick look. I know people work off the 12th fret and stuff, but my guide, my comparison guide, is off the 22nd or 3rd fret, and that's 1 millimetre. Actually, it would be really straight. That's 1.5 millimetres action at the 24th fret, which is absolutely unbelievably low, really, considering. So now I've got myself the a good action. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to overdo this for Malcolm. I want to get it right so it doesn't detune, or so the intonation isn't wrong, but I don't want to make it so radically different that it feels uncomfortable to play. So I'm now going to stop on the E string, and I'm going to move to the A string. I'm going to pull that out of its way, and I'm going to do the same thing and just take a bit of time to wear away, cut away I should say, at the A string slot. And don't assume, if you're doing this, never assume that this next one up the in the sequence, never assume that it's if the first one doesn't cut very quickly, don't assume that the next one's going to cut slowly, because it might actually, you might find it's a lot sharper, or it's cleaner or something, and it might cut quicker, and then you might catch yourself out. So I'm not going to assume anything. I'm going to take everything as I find it. So at this stage, what I'm doing is I'm working on a visual comparison. So I'm looking to look at the shadows. Yeah. So my guide at this stage, the shadow is the shadow that's cast, or the gap between the string and its shadow on the fret, and I can see this very accurately. And once you get used to it, your eye is very, very sensitive to that gap, and I can see when I'm getting close. And when you get close, then you can get out the feeler gauge and just double check, or get yourself a final reading so you're confident you're where you should be. That wouldn't help if I go the wrong way, will it? Like I said, don't worry about getting exactly in tune. You're worried at this stage only about deepening those slots so that you're getting approximately down to the same level as the previous string. Now, if you're worried about the radius of the guitar at this stage, you're saying, well, how do I make sure that the strings are following the correct radius? If you think about it, if you're using the shadow above the fret technique, which I'm currently doing, if you keep the gap the same as you go across the fret, then you will clearly be following the radius of the guitar, because the fret follows the radius of the neck anyway. So again, really slow. Now what I may well do at this point is stop this. Thank you, Moth. Stop this, put the radio on, so I can just carry on doing this without talking and boring you to death, because you can see this is taking some time, but it's not a job that I want to hasten. Slowly. Okay, so I'm going to cut for now. We've been here 35 minutes already. I'm going to put the radio on and I'll come back to you when we're done. Yo, finally. Long, slow process, but we've just finally got there, and I'm going to give this a rub down on the strings. Could use cleaning up the slots slightly. They get a bit grubby when you grind them with the little things. What's that? Something sticky, which we'll want to get off. Thank you very much. Don't want sticky, please. But yeah, we've cut the nut down and we've got everything down to the position we wanted in. Phew, thankfully that came off. A bit of sticky goo from somewhere. A horrible moment. It felt like a scratch. Okay, so we are. I'll get this in tune. Now I think that is in much better shape, playing shape. I'm just going to stick a quick strap on it, just a feel. But we've a fraction taken the action down a fraction, action by a fraction, and we've cut the nut slots down from 0.55 of a millimetre down to 0.25, which makes an easier guitar to play. Still quite, I mean, for my liking, still quite a bit. Now we know the intonation here was right already, so it's just how it plays at this end. I think it's pretty good. I'm happy with that. I'm going to stop right there, and this is Sam signing off in the Reloved Guitars workshop. I'm going to just give a quick polish down, silicone polish, nothing special here, just a quick surface grime remover for the ML. Sorry, when I say nothing special, what I mean is no special particular kinds of goo, just a good old-fashioned silicone-based polish, just to get the dust off for putting this little baby back in its bag. And I'm happy with that. It's got a much better action at the nut end. Maybe the only thing I might do in the house a bit later on is just clean out those little bits there, the nut slots there. Currently they are a tiny bit on the grubby side. It's what you get when you cut those slots. So it could do with just cleaning those. And now I have one thing to put back on, and that's this little screw. I'm going to put the cover back on. We haven't needed to adjust the cover because the relief in the neck was perfect, and it's gone back in with the strings under pressure, which is what I was kind of relieved to get anyway. No pun intended, by the way. Relief in the neck. But it meant that we didn't have to do any adjustments to the truss rod on this guitar, which is just fine by me. Just easier. It means it's also set up. You can tell it's set up right from the beginning in respect of how the truss rod worked, because ideally you should have as much. The strings should do the work of putting relief into the neck. I mean, they do anyway, but if all things being equal, you should be able to take the strings off, the neck goes straight, put them back on, and the neck goes back into the right relief for playing. So there we have it, the ML2 Chapman. Beautifully out of tune because I've just put it on the deck. Nice and nicely intonated around the nut area. So this little fella's back in its bag, ready for Malcolm tomorrow. I'm hoping he's going to like the feel of that, because that's how it should play, I think, right back at the beginning. Now I'm going to knock off today. Still got plenty more work to do in here, but that's enough for today. Half an hour overtime, but I wanted to get that exactly right. So I hope you enjoyed watching that. Took a long time to do the cutting the nut slots. As it does, it's always going to take a long time. I think I'm going to have to invest in the proper nut slot files in the long run, because it's too fiddly and time consuming to be doing it with these little things each time, and particularly when they bend and get completely distorted by the end of a couple of jobs. So ultimately they're not really that much of an economy when it comes down to it, so you end up buying the real tool. But it took us a few months to work that out, and we'll come back next time with maybe some easier files to use. Thank you for spending time with me, and see you again soon.